Eden's Fall, Chapter 3, Lines in the Sand. The medical spire gleamed under the artificial sunlight, its smooth white surface designed to evoke feelings of cleanliness and healing. Located in the Central Administrative District, it housed New Arcadia's most advanced medical facilities, research laboratories, and, hidden behind euphemistic terminology, the recalibration center where troublesome citizens were remade into more compliant versions of themselves. From their vantage point in an adjacent maintenance tower, Elias and Cora studied the spire's security patterns through enhanced binoculars. Their gray technician uniforms, standard for maintenance workers throughout the city, provided reasonable cover, though not indefinitely. Security algorithms tracked workers' locations and would flag extended deviations from assigned tasks. "The transfer team will arrive with Maya in approximately 40 minutes, Cora said, consulting the infiltration timeline developed by Vashti's security specialists. "They'll enter through the administrative portal on level 32. "And our window?" Elias asked, memorizing the guard rotations visible through the transparent sections of the spire's exterior. 7 minutes from the moment the diversionary demonstration begins in the Commerce District. Cora checked their synchronized timepieces. Vashti's teams are already in position. Once the security forces redistribute, we make our move. The plan relied on precise timing and the architect's predictable response protocols. Major demonstrations had been relatively rare in New Arcadia's history. But when they occurred, security forces followed established patterns, reinforcing administrative centers first, then moving to contain the disturbance at its source. The medical spire, while important, would temporarily become a secondary priority once the Commerce District erupted in coordinated protest. What if the demonstration doesn't draw enough security personnel? Elias worried, the countless variables of their hastily assembled plan weighing on him. Cora's expression remained determined. "Then we adapt. Chen's operatives inside the spire will still provide access, but our extraction window narrows considerably." The resistance network had proven more extensive than Elias had imagined, with sympathizers in virtually every level of New Arcadia's infrastructure, including, crucially, within the medical and security systems. What they lacked in firepower, they compensated for with information and strategic positioning. Their communicators vibrated simultaneously, the signal from Vashti that the demonstration phase had begun. Moments later, emergency alerts flashed across the city's public information screens, announcing unauthorized assemblies in the Commerce District and warning citizens to avoid the area. "Right on schedule," Cora noted with grim satisfaction. "Shall we?" Together they moved from their observation point to the maintenance access tunnel connecting to the medical spire's lower levels. Security at these junctions had always been minimal. The architects of New Arcadia's protection systems had focused on controlling the visible entrances and exits, underestimating the complex network of service passageways that kept the city functioning. A resistance operative awaited them at the access point, dressed in the green uniform of medical support staff. "Archivist, engineer," she greeted them with a quick nod. "I'm Dr. Nazrin. I'll guide you to the recalibration center. We have approximately 12 minutes before the security systems complete their automated recalibration following the alert." As they entered the medical spire through the service entrance, Dr. Nazrin handed them identification badges and medical scrubs to wear over their maintenance uniforms. "The transfer team will use elevator bank C. Our intelligence indicates Archivist Levine has been sedated but remains conscious. The standard protocol calls for minimal security, 2 guards, as recalibration candidates are typically not considered flight risks. Because most are already partially processed," Elias guessed darkly. Dr. Nazrin nodded. "Preliminary cognitive suppression makes resistance unlikely. However, your colleague's processing was expedited for political reasons, so she may retain more awareness than typical candidates." The doctor led them through service corridors that gradually gave way to the more polished hallways of the medical spire's interior. Medical staff moved purposefully about their duties, most paying little attention to 3 more colleagues in standard uniforms. Occasionally, security officers would pass, their attention primarily focused on their communication devices as updates from the Commerce District demonstration streamed in. "Status report from Vashti," Cora whispered, checking her secure communicator. Demonstration has grown to approximately 5,000 participants. Security forces deploying in significant numbers. Secondary demonstrations beginning in labor sectors 7 and 19. The resistance had coordinated well, spreading security resources thin across multiple locations. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Dr. Nazrin guided them to a secluded monitoring station overlooking Elevator Bank C. "They're coming up now," she said, indicating the display that showed the elevator's progress. 2 guards, 1 medical technician, and your archivist. Elias felt his heart rate accelerate as he recognized Maya's slumped form in the elevator's security feed. She appeared conscious but disoriented, her movements sluggish as the guards flanked her on either side. The medical technician stood in front, reviewing information on a digital tablet, likely the recalibration protocol designed specifically for Maya. "When the doors open," Dr. Nazrin instructed, "I'll approach as the receiving physician. The procedure requires a medical handoff and documentation verification, which should create a momentary distraction. That's when you'll deploy this." She handed Cora what appeared to be a standard medical device. "Localized neural disruptor," Cora identified, examining the device. "It will affect everyone within a 3-meter radius?" "Precisely. Temporary disorientation. Approximately 30 seconds of effectiveness. More than enough time to secure your colleague and reach the service exit." Dr. Nazrin checked the time. "Ready? They'll arrive in 10 seconds. The elevator chimed softly as it reached their level. Nazrin stepped forward confidently, digital tablet in hand, as the doors slid open to reveal Maya and her escorts. "Patient transfer for recalibration protocol 17B, Dr. Nazrin announced professionally. "I'll need verification of the cognitive suppression levels and preliminary neural mapping." As the medical technician stepped forward with the corresponding data, Cora activated the disruptor. A subtle pulse rippled through the immediate area, imperceptible except for its effects. The guards staggered slightly, their expressions confused as their neural processes temporarily scrambled. The medical technician dropped his tablet, reaching for the wall to steady himself. Elias moved quickly to Maya, who appeared affected by the disruptor but less severely, likely due to her sedated state. "Maya, it's Elias," he said urgently, supporting her as her knees buckled. "We're getting you out of here." Recognition flickered in her unfocused eyes. "Eli? How?" No time to explain. He guided her toward the service corridor where their escape route waited. Cora followed, walking backward to monitor the disoriented guards who were already beginning to recover. 30 seconds, Dr. Nazrin warned, positioning herself to block pursuit. "I'll delay them as long as possible. The exit is 3 junctions east, then north to the maintenance shaft." They moved as quickly as Maya's condition allowed, supporting her between them as they navigated the service corridors. Behind them, shouts of alarm indicated the guards had recovered enough to recognize what had happened. Dr. Nazrin would buy them some time with a plausible medical explanation, but not much. "Security alert," Cora noted as alarm indicators began to flash along the corridor ceilings. "They've triggered a localized lockdown." "Will it affect the maintenance shaft access?" Elias asked, adjusting his grip on Maya, who seemed to be regaining more awareness with each passing minute. "Shouldn't. Those systems operate on separate protocols." Cora guided them around a corner, consulting the mental map she'd memorized. 2 more junctions. Maya's voice came stronger now. "The broadcast, did it work?" "Better than we expected," Elias assured her. "The truth is out, Maya. The entire city knows about Eden's origins." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Worth it then." They reached the maintenance shaft access point, an unassuming service panel that concealed one of the vertical conduits running the height of the medical spire. One of Chen's operatives waited beside the open panel, securing harnesses for their descent. "You'll need to move quickly," the operative advised, helping them strap Maya into a harness. "Security protocols will eventually override the maintenance systems. Descent point is level 12, northwest quadrant. Extraction team waiting with transport." The sound of approaching security forces echoed from further down the corridor. Elias and Cora exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the narrowing margin for escape. "Get Maya out first," Elias insisted, I'll follow and seal the access point." No time for debate. Cora helped Maya into the shaft, and the operative began controlling her descent with practiced efficiency. Cora followed immediately after, disappearing into the vertical tunnel just as the first security officer rounded the distant corner. Elias grabbed the final harness, securing it around himself as he backed into the shaft. The operative handed him a small device. "Electromagnetic seal. Activate once you're inside. It will buy you time." With a nod of gratitude, Elias slipped fully into the shaft and pulled the access panel closed behind him. He activated the seal just as the security team reached the door, hearing their muffled curses as the panel magnetically locked in place. The descent was controlled but rapid, the harness system designed for efficient vertical movement through the city's infrastructure. Above, the sounds of security forces attempting to breach the sealed access point gradually faded. Below, the dim lights of the level 12 exit point grew steadily brighter. Cora and Maya had already reached the exit and been helped through by the time Elias approached. As he emerged into another service corridor, he found them waiting with 2 resistance members dressed as medical transport personnel. "Medical evacuation vehicle standing by," one of them reported. "Standard protocol for transferring patients between facilities. Our documentation shows authorization for transport to the rehabilitation center in the residential spire." "Will it hold up to scrutiny?" Elias asked, helping Maya into a wheelchair as part of their cover. "Long enough to clear the medical district," came the confident reply. "After that, we switched to alternative transport at the Gray Junction." The medical evacuation proceeded with surprising smoothness. Their forged documentation, created by resistance members with access to the medical systems, satisfied the cursory checks at the medical spire's lower exit. By the time a comprehensive security alert had been issued, they were already en route to the Gray Junction, where they transferred to a waste management vehicle similar to the one that had facilitated Elias's earlier escape. Hours later, safely returned to the Resistance headquarters in the transition zone, Maya sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, the effects of the sedation gradually wearing off as Dr. Chen personally administered the counteragents. The cognitive suppressants they used were preliminary only, Chen explained, reviewing her neural scan. Designed to make you compliant for the full recalibration procedure, not to permanently alter your thought patterns. You should experience no lasting effects. Except perhaps nightmares about what almost happened, Maya observed dryly, her natural sharpness returning. She looked up at Elias and Cora. "Thank you. I know what you risked coming for me." "We wouldn't have left you," Cora said simply. Vashti joined them, her expression both satisfied and concerned. "The rescue was successful, but it's accelerated the timeline. The architects have declared a citywide security emergency. Demonstrations are being forcibly dispersed, and they've begun identifying and detaining known resistance sympathizers." "They're afraid," Chen noted, setting aside his medical implements. The combined impact of the truth broadcast and coordinated civil disobedience has shaken their confidence in their control systems. "What's our next move?" Elias asked, aware that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no retreat. The resistance was now fully exposed, its existence acknowledged in emergency broadcasts that warned citizens against organized disruptors of social harmony. Vashti gestured toward the command center's main display, where footage from throughout New Arcadia showed a city in upheaval. The architects are attempting to isolate the unrest, portraying it as limited to the underclasses. But the truth is spreading through all levels now. Even some in the governing class are questioning the official response. "Speaking of responses," Maya said, "what exactly was their counter-narrative to our broadcast? I was indisposed before I could hear it." "A masterpiece of partial admission," Elias replied. "They acknowledged the difficult decisions made during the collapse, but framed them as necessary sacrifices to preserve humanity. They're offering reforms, increased mobility between levels, a citizens' advisory council, more transparent historical education, while maintaining the fundamental power structure. Classic authoritarian adaptation," Chen observed. "Concede what you must to preserve what you value most. Control." Vashti's expression hardened. "Which is why our next phase must target that control directly. Not through violence. We lack the capability and moral authority for that approach, but by demonstrating that New Arcadia can function without architect oversight. She expanded a section of the display, showing the status of various city systems across multiple levels. The architects maintain power through resource control, water, food, energy, air filtration. Citizens comply because they believe these systems would fail without centralized management. We need to demonstrate otherwise. How? Cora asked, her engineer's mind already analyzing the problem. By establishing autonomous operation in key sectors, Vashti explained. Our network includes system administrators and engineers throughout critical infrastructure. With coordinated action, we can temporarily decouple certain districts from central control while maintaining essential services. The implications were significant. Not merely protest, but the creation of functioning alternatives to architect governance. It would directly challenge the narrative that social harmony required hierarchical control. The architects would respond with force, Elias cautioned, thinking through the potential consequences. They couldn't allow such a demonstration to succeed. Which is why we need widespread support before we act, Vashti acknowledged. The broadcast created awareness, but awareness alone isn't enough. Citizens need to see a viable alternative, not just to the architect's historical narrative, but to their governance model. Chen had been listening silently, his weathered face thoughtful. Now he spoke with the quiet authority that seemed to command natural respect. Before we can establish alternative governance, we must address the question that citizens throughout New Arcadia are asking themselves. Was the architect's great crime justified by humanity's survival? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable yet unavoidable. Even among the resistance leadership, Elias sensed ambivalence. The methods of Project Eden had been unconscionable, engineered catastrophe, selective salvation based on genetic and psychological profiles, generations of deception. Yet New Arcadia existed, humanity survived, and the alternative might well have been extinction. We need to present more than moral outrage, Chen continued. We need to offer a vision of what New Arcadia could become, a society that preserves the technological achievement and sustainability of Eden while rejecting its authoritarian foundation and historical deception. Maya, still pale but increasingly alert, leaned forward. We need to use the archives. The complete archives, not just the sanitized public records. All eyes turned to her as she explained. As deputy archivist, I've seen fragments of research the architects commissioned but subsequently restricted. Alternative approaches to sustainability, distributed governance models, even early plans for Eden that didn't require catastrophic population reduction. They chose the path of maximum control. Not because it was the only option, but because it best served their vision of humanity's future. Can you access these records? Vashti asked intently. Maya exchanged glances with Elias. Not remotely, not with the security protocols currently active. We would need physical access to the archive's central hub. Impossible under current conditions, Cora observed. The administrative district is under maximum security. Every entrance is being monitored for known resistance members. Not every entrance, Elias said slowly, an idea forming. The archives maintain dedicated emergency access points, physical connections to critical historical data that would be needed in case of digital systems failure. Old-fashioned backup systems? Vashti asked skeptically. The architects value continuity above all, Elias explained. Digital systems, however advanced, remain vulnerable to certain forms of disruption. The physical archive, actual documentation, storage crystals, backup drives, exists in secure vaults beneath the central hub, accessible through emergency protocols that bypass standard security. And you can activate these protocols? Chen inquired. As Chief Archivist, yes. It would trigger alerts, but by the time security forces responded, we could have extracted the necessary data. Elias turned to Maya. Do you remember where the restricted research materials are located? She nodded. Section 42B, Quantum Storage Units 17 through 35. I cataloged them during the annual integrity verification, though I wasn't permitted to access the contents. So we need to get you both back into the archives, Cora summarized. During a citywide security alert, extract restricted research materials and escape. all without being captured. When you put it that way, it sounds rather ambitious, Maya replied with a hint of her usual dry humor. It's more than ambitious, Vashti said, but it may be necessary. If these materials contain viable alternatives to the architect's governance model, they would be powerful tools for building citizen support. The discussion shifted to practical considerations: timing, access methods, security countermeasures. As the Resistance's technical specialists began developing a comprehensive infiltration plan, Elias found himself drawn to the command center's observation window, which offered a restricted view of New Arcadia's central spires rising above the transition zone. Cora joined him there, her presence a silent comfort amid the mounting tension. "Having second thoughts?" she asked quietly. "Not about our goals," he replied, "but I keep thinking about consequences. The architects, for all their deception, have maintained a functioning society for generations. If we succeed in undermining their authority without establishing a viable alternative, chaos?" Cora suggested. "Collapse. The very outcomes the architects have conditioned citizens to fear without their benevolent oversight?" Elias nodded. "Their historical crime doesn't negate the fragility of our current existence. New Arcadia's systems are interconnected, precisely calibrated. Disruption without direction could threaten everyone, not just the governing class. Which is why we need those alternative models," Cora reminded him, "to show there's a path between blind obedience and destructive anarchy." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the communication station. "Incoming emergency broadcast. Citywide announcement from the Architect Council." All activity in the command center ceased as attention turned to the main display, where Senior Architect Keller's image appeared. Her expression was grave, her usual composure noticeably strained. "Citizens of New Arcadia," she began, "our city faces unprecedented challenges to social harmony. Organized disruptors have spread misinformation, incited unlawful assemblies, and now directly threatened essential services through coordinated sabotage." Images flashed behind her. Demonstrations in the Commerce District, work stoppages in the underclasses, even peaceful gatherings in some mid-level residential areas. While the Council recognizes legitimate concerns regarding historical awareness, these disruptions have moved beyond constructive dialogue into dangerous destabilization. Therefore, by unanimous decision, the Architect Council hereby invokes Emergency Protocol 7. A murmur ran through the command center. Even Chen, usually unflappable, straightened with evident concern. "What's Protocol 7? Elias asked. "Resource security measures," Vashti explained tersely. "Centralized control of all essential systems, restriction of movement between levels, prioritized distribution based on social necessity metrics. In simple terms, the architects would use basic survival needs, water, food, energy, as leverage against civil disobedience." Keller continued. "Effective immediately. All citizens must return to their designated residential sectors. Inter-level transit is temporarily suspended except for essential personnel. Resource distribution will operate on emergency scheduling until social harmony is restored." Her expression softened, though the steel beneath remained evident. "These measures are not punitive but protective. The complex systems that sustain New Arcadia require coordinated management and cannot function amid civil disorder. The Council remains committed to addressing historical questions and implementing promised reforms once stability is restored." The broadcast concluded with specific instructions for different city sectors, detailing restricted movement zones and modified resource distribution schedules. The message was clear: cooperation or deprivation. "They're escalating faster than anticipated," Vashti observed, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Using survival necessities as weapons against dissent." "It's strategically sound," Chen acknowledged grimly. "They're betting that physical needs will eventually outweigh ideological concerns. History suggests they're often correct." The command center erupted in urgent activity as resistance coordinators assessed the immediate impact of Protocol 7 on their networks and operations. Initial reports confirmed the architects weren't bluffing. Water pressure had already decreased in sectors with high demonstration participation, and energy rationing had begun in the underclass levels where work stoppages were most widespread. This changes our timeline, Elias realized, turning to Vashti and Chen. We can't wait to gather more information or build additional support. The Archive's mission needs to happen immediately, before resource restrictions fully impact the resistance network. Agreed, Vashti said after brief consideration. We'll accelerate all preparations. The architects have shown their hand. They'll sacrifice citizens' well-being to maintain control. That fact alone may create more support for our cause than any historical revelation. As emergency planning sessions formed throughout the command center, Elias, Cora, and Maya gathered with the technical specialists to finalize their archive's infiltration strategy. The stakes had risen dramatically. They weren't simply seeking historical validation anymore, but potentially fighting for immediate survival. Access through Maintenance Tunnel B-17 remains viable, the infrastructure specialist reported, displaying the route on a detailed schematic of the administrative district. Security patrols have increased, but the automated systems still operate on standard intervals. We can predict and avoid them. Once inside, Maya continued, having recovered enough to participate fully, we'll need approximately 20 minutes to reach the emergency access point, activate the protocols, locate and extract the relevant materials. The extraction team will be positioned at these coordinates, the security coordinator added, highlighting positions on the schematic. Standard maintenance vehicle, emergency response authorization. You'll have a 5-minute window to reach the extraction point once you've secured the materials. Elias studied the plan, identifying potential failure points and contingencies. It was high risk, but potentially high reward. The restricted research might provide not just intellectual ammunition against the architect's historical narrative, but practical alternatives to their resource control tactics. We move in 6 hours, Vashti decided. That gives us time to position our people throughout the affected sectors and establish alternative supply lines where possible. The architects believe resource restriction will force compliance. We need to demonstrate otherwise. As the meeting dispersed, Chen approached Elias, Maya, and Cora with an unexpected request. Before you depart on this mission, I'd like to record your testimonies, your first-hand accounts of discovering Eden's true history and what it means to you. Is this the time for historical documentation? Maya asked skeptically. Chen's weathered face conveyed both sadness and determination. It's exactly the time. If your mission succeeds, these testimonies will add personal weight to the historical evidence. If it fails, he didn't need to complete the thought. If they were captured, recalibrated, or worse, their experiences would otherwise be lost. One by one, they recorded brief statements, not just factual accounts of what they had discovered, but their reflections on what it meant for New Arcadia's past, present, and possible futures. Elias spoke of the archivist's duty to preserve truth, not selected narratives. Maya described her grandmother's whispered stories that had led her to question official history. Cora reflected on the environmental engineer's responsibility to build sustainable systems based on truth rather than deception. When they finished, Chen secured the recordings with encryption known only to the resistance leadership. Whatever happens, he assured them, your voices will be heard. The truth you've helped reveal will not be buried again. The administrative district lay under an uneasy pall as evening approached. The usual precise choreography of professional activity had been disrupted by Emergency Protocol 7, with many workers having been sent to their residential sectors, while essential personnel remained under heightened security. Security patrols moved through the usually open plazas, their presence more visible than at any time in recent memory. Approaching through Maintenance Tunnel B-17, Elias, Maya, and Cora moved with the purposeful efficiency of infrastructure workers responding to an emergency. Their forged credentials identified them as environmental system specialists addressing air filtration malfunctions, a cover story carefully selected to match actual minor issues in the district's environmental controls. Security patrol ahead, Cora warned quietly, checking the scanner that detected the unique signatures of security officers' equipment. 30 seconds until they passed the junction. They paused in a maintenance alcove. adjusting their equipment carts to appear as though conducting routine diagnostics on the tunnel's atmospheric sensors. When the patrol passed the connecting corridor without turning toward their position, they resumed their careful progress toward the archive's central hub. "I've been thinking about something," Maya said softly as they navigated the dimly lit tunnels. "After we expose the alternative research, what exactly is our ideal outcome? The complete dissolution of the Architect Council? Some form of shared governance? What does New Arcadia look like if we succeed?" It was a question Elias had been pondering since their first discovery of Eden's true origins. "I don't think there's a simple answer," he admitted. "The Architect's crimes can't be dismissed, but neither can their technical expertise in maintaining New Arcadia's systems. Perhaps the goal isn't replacement, but transformation," Cora suggested. "A society where historical truth is acknowledged, where level distinctions are reduced, where governance is accountable to all citizens, but where the technological foundations remain intact." "Revolution without destruction," Maya summarized skeptically. "History suggests that's rarely how these things unfold." They reached the emergency access point, an unassuming maintenance hatch that concealed one of the direct connections to the archive's physical storage vaults. Elias examined the security seal, its sophisticated technology belying the apparent simplicity of the entrance. "My credentials should override the security protocols," he explained, preparing the specialized access key provided by the Resistance's technical team. "But it will trigger a notification to archive security. From that point, we have approximately 17 minutes before manual verification would be initiated." 17 minutes to locate and extract decades of suppressed research, Maya noted. "No pressure." Elias activated the access key, holding his breath as the security seal processed his credentials. After an agonizing moment, the seal turned from red to green, and the hatch unlocked with a barely audible click. "We're in," he whispered, feeling both relief and apprehension as they slipped through the hatch into the rarely visited physical archives beneath the central hub. The space beyond was vast and meticulously organized, row upon row of storage units containing New Arcadia's most critical historical records in physical form. Unlike the digital archives accessible to authorized citizens, these physical backups were comprehensive, unedited, and, most importantly, included materials deemed too sensitive for general knowledge. Maya led them confidently through the labyrinth of storage units, her mental map of the restricted section guiding them toward their objective. "Section 42B should be ahead. Fourth aisle on the left." They moved quickly but carefully, aware that automated monitoring systems throughout the archives would detect unauthorized access to restricted materials. Their plan relied on Elias's Chief Archivist credentials providing temporary authorization, a loophole in the security protocols designed for emergency preservation situations. "Here," Maya announced as they reached Section 42B. "Quantum storage units 17 through 35. These contain the alternative research commissioned during Eden's early development, the paths not taken." The storage units resembled crystalline cubes, each containing terabytes of densely packed data encoded at the quantum level. Cora began preparing the specialized extraction devices that would copy the contents without damaging the originals, leaving no evidence of their access except in the security logs, which would show authorized emergency verification by the Chief Archivist. "Beginning extraction," Cora reported, connecting the devices to the first storage unit. "Estimated time, 3 minutes per unit. We should prioritize the most critical materials." "Units 22 through 27, Maya directed. "Those contain the distributed governance models and alternative resource management systems, the practical alternatives to the Architect's centralized control." As the extraction proceeded, Elias found himself surveying the surrounding archives with a historian's appreciation. Here lay humanity's accumulated knowledge, preserved through catastrophe, both natural and engineered, at incalculable cost. Whatever the Architect's crimes, their commitment to preservation had been genuine, even if selectively implemented. "Something's wrong," Cora said suddenly, her voice tense as she checked the extraction progress. "The data structures are more complex than anticipated. The process is taking longer than projected." Elias checked their timeline. "How much longer?" "At current rates, at least 8 minutes for the priority units alone. Cora's expression was grim. That puts us dangerously close to security verification protocols activating. We need to split up, Maya decided quickly. Cora continues the extraction, I'll prepare the transport case, and Elias monitors the access point for early security response. It was their best option under the circumstances. Elias returned to the emergency access point, maintaining communication through their secure channel as Maya and Cora continued the extraction process. From his position, he could observe both the access hatch and the main corridor leading to the regular archive entrance. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Extraction at 65%, Cora reported, holding steady but still behind optimal timeline. Security logs showing increased activity in the main archives, Elias warned, monitoring the system status through his access terminal. They may have flagged the emergency protocol's activation for manual review earlier than expected. Just 2 more minutes, Cora assured him. We're extracting the most critical materials first. If necessary, we can abort the remaining units. Elias was about to respond when movement in the main corridor caught his attention. 2 archive security officers had entered the physical storage area, their deliberately casual manner suggesting routine verification rather than emergency response. But verification nonetheless, and much earlier than anticipated. Security in the archives, he hissed into the communicator, not yet heading toward our section but present and active. Extraction at 82%, Cora replied tensely. Need at least 60 more seconds for critical materials. Elias made a split-second decision. Continue extraction. I'll create a diversion to draw them away from your position. Before either Cora or Maya could protest, Elias slipped away from the emergency access point and moved toward a different section of the archives. There, he deliberately triggered a storage unit alarm by attempting access without proper authorization. A noisy distraction that would immediately draw security attention. As expected, the archive security officers responded to the alarm, moving quickly toward the disturbance and away from Section 42B, where Cora and Maya were completing the extraction. Diversion created, Elias reported. You have maybe 2 minutes before they realize it's a false alarm. Status? Extraction complete for priority units, Cora confirmed. Maya is securing the transport case now. Head directly to the emergency access point, Elias directed. I'll circle around and meet you there. It was a solid plan, except for one critical detail Elias had overlooked. The security alarm he'd triggered would prompt a system-wide security verification, including electronic sealing of all emergency access points. By creating the diversion, he had potentially cut off their escape route. He realized this fatal error as he circled back toward their entry point and found the security seal had reactivated, now glowing an ominous red. His credentials would no longer override the lockdown without secondary verification from archive security. Access point sealed, he reported grimly. Security lockdown in effect. Can you bypass? Maya asked, her voice steady despite the rising danger. Not without equipment we don't have. We need an alternative exit. Elias thought frantically, reviewing his mental map of the archives. The maintenance conduit in Section 50? It connects to the environmental control system for the entire administrative district. That's 3 sections away, Cora noted. And security is already searching the archives. It's our only option, Elias insisted. Meet me at junction point C12. Stay in the peripheral aisles to avoid security sensors. The rendezvous was tense, but successful. The 3 converging at the designated junction with the precious transport case containing the extracted research materials. From there, Elias led them through the archive's least traveled sections toward the maintenance conduit he had identified as their escape route. The conduit was designed for automated maintenance drones, he explained as they reached Section 50. It's narrow but navigable by humans in emergency situations. It should bypass the security lockdown and connect to the main environmental maintenance tunnel. The conduit access panel yielded to Elias's maintenance override, a separate system from the archive security protocols. Beyond lay a narrow tunnel lined with atmospheric processing equipment, dimly lit by maintenance lights spaced at regular intervals. I'll go first, Cora volunteered, her slighter frame better suited to the confined space. Pass the transport case after I'm through, then follow in sequence. One by one, they entered the conduit, pulling themselves along using the maintenance handholds designed for human intervention in case of drone failure. The space was claustrophobic and uncomfortably warm from the surrounding equipment, but it provided a path beyond the archive security perimeter. After what seemed an eternity of careful movement through the confined space, they reached an access hatch that, according to Elias's knowledge of the maintenance systems, should connect to the Environmental Control Center for the administrative district. Beyond this point, we'll be in a monitored area again, he cautioned. Maintenance credentials will provide temporary cover, but we need to reach the extraction point quickly. Extraction team confirms they're in position, Maya reported, checking their secure communicator. North Service Entrance, Level 3. They're monitoring security channels and report increased activity throughout the district. General alert hasn't been issued yet, but security is definitely aware of an intrusion in the archives. Cora opened the access hatch cautiously, confirming the space beyond was clear before they emerged into the Environmental Control Center. A massive chamber filled with the equipment that maintained atmospheric conditions throughout the administrative district. Automated systems handled most functions, with human technicians present only for oversight and emergency intervention. 2 technicians on duty, Elias observed, spotting them at a monitoring station across the chamber. Standard procedure during evening shift. They shouldn't question maintenance workers transitioning through, but we need to appear routine. They adjusted their uniforms and equipment, projecting the confidence of personnel on assigned duties as they crossed the chamber toward the service exit. The technicians glanced up briefly but returned to their monitoring without comment. Precisely the non-reaction they had hoped for. The service exit led to a transport corridor used for moving equipment between administrative buildings, and crucially, with access to the North Service entrance where their extraction team waited. They moved with deliberate purpose now, neither hurrying nor lingering as they navigated the final stretch toward extraction. Alert status changing, Maya warned, checking her communicator. Archive security has confirmed unauthorized access to restricted materials. They're expanding the search perimeter. Almost there, Elias encouraged, spotting the service entrance ahead. Extraction vehicles should be at the loading platform. True to plan, a standard maintenance transport vehicle waited at the designated point, its driver wearing the same gray uniform as their own. As they approached, the side door slid open to reveal the extraction team inside. 2 resistance operatives prepared to transport them back to the transition zone. They had barely entered the vehicle when security alerts began blaring throughout the administrative district, the full security response they had narrowly avoided. The driver pulled away from the loading platform with careful adherence to standard protocols, neither too fast nor too slow, as security personnel began streaming into the area. Checkpoints will be activated at all district exits, the driver informed them calmly. We'll use the environmental emergency clearance to bypass primary verification. Auxiliary team is creating a diversion at the east perimeter to draw resources away from our exit route. The extraction proceeded with tense efficiency. Each checkpoint a moment of held breath as their credentials and emergency clearance were verified. The final district boundary loomed ahead, the most heavily secured transition between the administrative center and the surrounding sectors. Primary verification active, the checkpoint officer announced as they approached. Maintenance credentials insufficient for district exit during security alert. Secondary verification required. It was the scenario they had prepared for but hoped to avoid. The second extraction operative produced specialized authorization codes, genuine emergency response designations obtained through the Resistance's network within city administration. Environmental contamination detected in residential sector 7, she explained with professional urgency. Atmospheric regulation has directed immediate response team deployment. Authorization code 7 Delta 42. The security officer hesitated, checking the code against his database. Verification pending. Confirmed. Proceed directly to designated response zone. Deviation will trigger immediate security response. As they cleared the final checkpoint and entered the transit corridors connecting the administrative district to the surrounding sectors, tension in the vehicle eased perceptibly. They weren't yet safe. Security patrols had increased throughout all upper levels under Emergency Protocol 7. But the most dangerous phase of the mission had been completed successfully. "Transport case secure?" the extraction leader verified. Cora patted the specialized container that held the extracted research materials, potentially the key to challenging the architect's resource control and offering viable alternatives to citizens throughout New Arcadia. "Secure and intact," she confirmed. Extraction successful. But their success had come at a cost they had yet to fully calculate. By accessing restricted archives during a citywide security alert, they had forced the architects to acknowledge the resistance as more than isolated malcontents. The response would be proportional to the perceived threat, and the architects now understood that threat extended to the very foundations of their authority. As the extraction vehicle navigated the increasingly complex security landscape of a city under emergency protocols, Elias found himself wondering if they had crossed a threshold from which New Arcadia could never return. The lines had been drawn more starkly than ever before. Truth versus security, freedom versus stability, justice versus order. The question that remained was where the citizens of New Arcadia would stand when forced to choose between these competing values. The research they had extracted might influence that choice, but ultimately, the people themselves would determine whether Eden would fall or be reborn. The Resistance Command Center hummed with urgent activity when they arrived, the successful extraction of the archive materials providing a much-needed morale boost amid increasingly dire reports from throughout New Arcadia. Emergency Protocol 7 had been implemented with methodical efficiency, its effects already visible in the underclasses and spreading to mid-level sectors where support for the resistance had emerged. Water pressure reduced by 40% in labor sectors 3 through 11, a communications operator reported. Energy rationing implemented in all underclass residential zones. Food distribution limited to essential minimums with enhanced verification requirements. "The architects aren't bluffing," Vashti observed grimly. "They're prepared to leverage basic needs against civil disobedience." "And the citizens' response?" Chen inquired, his weathered face showing the strain of recent events despite his characteristic composure. "Mixed," the operator admitted. "Approximately 60% of planned demonstrations have been postponed or canceled as people prioritize securing resources for their families. However, new forms of resistance are emerging. Resource sharing networks, unofficial distribution systems, information exchange points. Adaptation," Chen noted with quiet approval. "The architects control the official systems, but they cannot monitor every interaction between citizens." Elias, Cora, and Maya delivered the extracted materials to the technical team, who immediately began the delicate process of analyzing the quantum-encoded data. The materials spanned decades of research, alternative approaches to sustainability, resource management, and governance that had been commissioned during Eden's development, but ultimately rejected in favor of the centralized, hierarchical model implemented by the architects. "Early results are promising," the lead analyst reported after the initial assessment. "These aren't merely theoretical models, they include detailed implementation frameworks, resource requirement projections, transition planning, practical alternatives to the current system." "Anything immediately applicable to our situation?" Vashti asked, prioritizing tactical advantages in the escalating conflict. "Several possibilities," the analyst confirmed. "The distributed water management system could be implemented in sectors where pressure has been reduced. The localized energy generation models might offset rationing in some residential zones. Most importantly, the decentralized food production frameworks could provide alternatives to the centralized distribution now being restricted." "How quickly can we disseminate this information to affected sectors?" Elias asked, seeing the potential to counter the architect's resource leverage with practical alternatives. "That's the challenge," Vashti acknowledged. "With communication restrictions under Protocol 7, our normal information channels are compromised. We need a more dramatic approach, something that bypasses their control systems entirely." Maya, who had been studying the technical schematics with intense focus, looked up suddenly. "The atmospheric announcement system." All eyes turned to her as she elaborated. "Every sector has emergency atmospheric notification speakers, designed to warn citizens of environmental hazards that might affect life support systems. They operate on a separate network from standard communications, with minimal content filtering since they're designed for emergency use only. Could we access that system? Chen inquired, intrigued by the possibility. Cora was already analyzing the idea's feasibility. Possibly. The atmospheric system has distributed control nodes in each sector, a safety feature to ensure warnings could be issued even if central systems failed. With the right access codes and timing, we could broadcast practical alternatives directly to citizens in the most affected areas, Elias finished, seeing the strategic value immediately. Not just information about Eden's history, but actual solutions to the resource restrictions they're facing now. The discussion quickly evolved into technical planning, with the Resistance's specialists identifying potential access points and security vulnerabilities in the atmospheric notification system. Unlike their previous broadcast, which had relied on historical systems with limited security, this approach would require circumventing active, monitored safety protocols, a significantly greater challenge. As the planning intensified, Elias stepped away briefly, finding a quiet corner of the command center where he could process the rapid escalation of events. What had begun as a search for historical truth had evolved into something far more consequential, a direct challenge to the foundation of New Arcadia's social order. Chen joined him there, seemingly sensing his moment of reflection. Having doubts? The elderly scientist asked, his tone free of judgment. Not about the necessity of what we're doing, Elias clarified, but about the path forward. We're pushing toward a confrontation where neither side can fully retreat. The architects won't relinquish control willingly, and we can't accept a return to deception and inequality. The question of whether revolution is worth its cost, Chen observed thoughtfully. I've spent most of my life preserving truth without acting upon it, waiting for the right moment when revelation might lead to transformation rather than destruction. I believe that moment has arrived, but the outcome remains uncertain. What happens if we succeed? Elias asked, voicing the question that had increasingly preoccupied him. If the architect's authority is undermined, if citizens throughout New Arcadia embrace alternatives to centralized control, what kind of society emerges from that transition? Chen's weathered face softened with something resembling hope. A society that preserves Eden's technological achievements while rejecting its authoritarian foundation. A society where citizens understand their true history yet move forward without being paralyzed by it. A society where levels exist as functional designations rather than hierarchical divisions. That's the ideal, Elias acknowledged. But transitions are rarely so clean, especially when basic resources are at stake. Which is why the alternatives we've extracted are so crucial, Chen reminded him. We're not merely tearing down the existing order, we're offering viable replacements for its essential functions. That distinction may determine whether New Arcadia emerges transformed or fractured. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the communications station. Incoming broadcast, emergency address from the Architect Council. For the second time that day, the command center fell silent as Senior Architect Keller appeared on the main display. Unlike her previous address, which had maintained a veneer of calm authority, she now appeared openly concerned, her usual composure visibly strained. Citizens of New Arcadia, she began, her voice carrying a new urgency. The social disruptions we face have reached a critical threshold. Organized elements have now targeted our historical archives, attempting to access and distort restricted materials related to Eden's founding and development. Images appeared beside her, security footage showing Elias, Cora, and Maya in the archives, their faces clearly identifiable despite their maintenance uniforms. These individuals, former Archivist Thorne, former Engineer Santos, and former Archivist Levine, have violated their oaths to preserve social harmony and now threaten the stability upon which all our lives depend. They are to be considered high-priority security risks, to be reported immediately if encountered. Keller's expression hardened as she continued. In light of this escalation, the Architect Council hereby expands Emergency Protocol 7 to include mandatory citizen verification at all resource distribution points. Citizens must present valid identification and confirm their residential status to receive allocated resources. The implications were clear. The architects were moving beyond general restrictions to targeted denial, potentially identifying and isolating resistant sympathizers through the resource distribution system. Furthermore, Keller announced, all citizens are required to return to their designated residential sectors for security verification within the next 12 hours. Those found outside their authorized zones without essential duty clearance will be subject to immediate detention for security assessment. The command center erupted in urgent discussion as the broadcast concluded with detailed implementation instructions for the expanded protocol. The architects had effectively declared martial law, using resource access as its primary enforcement mechanism. They're attempting to force citizens to choose sides, Vashti observed, her expression grim. By linking resource access to compliance, they're making the cost of resistance explicit. And raising the stakes for our counter-response, Elias noted. The atmospheric system plan becomes even more critical now. Citizens need practical alternatives before the verification deadlines. Cora, who had been conferring with the technical team, approached with both determination and concern evident in her posture. We've identified viable access points for the atmospheric notification system, but there's a complication. The most effective approach requires physical presence at one of the primary atmospheric monitoring stations. Where are these stations located? Chen asked. One in each major district, Cora explained. The most vulnerable to our methods would be the transition zone station, less heavily monitored than those in the upper levels, with security systems our specialists have previously mapped. The implication hung unspoken but understood. Another high-risk infiltration mission, this time with their identities now publicly known and security forces explicitly searching for them. I'll go, Elias said simply. As the public face of the conspiracy according to the architects, I'm already their prime target. Adding another charge hardly matters. Not alone, Cora countered immediately. The station's systems will require my expertise to access and reconfigure. Maya, who had been analyzing the extracted research with remarkable focus despite her recent ordeal, joined the conversation. And I'll coordinate content distribution from here, ensuring the practical alternatives reach the sectors where they're most needed and can be implemented with available resources. Their roles defined, preparation began in earnest. The technical team developed specialized tools for bypassing the atmospheric station security systems. The content team, led by Maya, distilled the complex alternative models into practical instructions that citizens could implement without specialized equipment or expertise. The security team mapped patrol patterns and identified extraction routes. Throughout the command center, the resistance network continued coordinating responses to Emergency Protocol 7, establishing unofficial resource distribution points and communication relays to support citizens affected by the restrictions. What had begun as an historical truth movement had evolved into a parallel governance structure, improvisational and incomplete, but increasingly essential as the architects weaponized basic necessities against their own citizens. As the mission preparations intensified, Elias found himself drawn once again to the observation window overlooking New Arcadia. The city that had once represented humanity's salvation now stood at a crossroads, its gleaming surface concealing deepening fractures beneath. The truth about Eden's fall had been revealed, but the consequences of that revelation continued to unfold in increasingly unpredictable ways. The lines had been drawn in the sand, clear and unmistakable. On one side stood the architects, with their vision of managed stability and hierarchical order, willing to leverage survival itself to maintain their authority. On the other stood the resistance, with their commitment to historical truth and distributed governance, offering alternatives to centralized control, while risking the fragile equilibrium that sustained them all. Between these lines stood the citizens of New Arcadia, increasingly forced to choose which vision of humanity's future they would embrace, a choice that would determine whether Eden would truly fall, or perhaps, in falling, be reborn into something both sustainable and just. If you enjoyed this third chapter of Eden's Fall, please take a moment to like and subscribe. In Chapter 4, we'll see how Elias and Cora's daring mission to access the atmospheric notification system unfolds. and whether the alternative models they've discovered can truly challenge the architect's control over New Arcadia. Will citizens choose truth over security? Will the resistance succeed in offering viable alternatives to centralized control? Subscribe now to find out what happens next in this dystopian struggle for humanity's future.